The classroom buzzed with laughter and small talk when the door opened. A new girl stepped inside, quiet and unsure. Her name was Amara Jennings, 14 years old, holding a violin case against her chest like it was something precious. It wasn't just an instrument. It was the last gift her grandmother ever gave her. The air inside the classroom felt heavier the moment she walked in. The teacher, Mr. Darnell, paused his writing and turned around slowly. His tone was flat, almost cold. "This is Amara Jennings," he said, waving his hand toward her like he was introducing a new chair instead of a person. "She'll be joining us for the semester." No welcome, no smile. Just words that hung in the air for a second before the room went back to whispers and quiet giggles. Amara gave a small nod and looked for an empty seat. She walked toward the back of the room, her steps soft, her face calm even though her stomach twisted. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judging, half-interested. Some students were still whispering. She caught a few words. Violin girl. Mute chick. Pretty eyes, though. She kept her head down. Her mom had told her that morning, "Keep your head low, baby. You're here to learn, not to impress anyone." That was Amara's plan. No drama, no noise. Just study, survive, and get through the year. But sometimes silence is louder than words. While everyone else filled the air with chatter, Amara's quietness stood out. The way she sat, straight-backed, hands folded, violin case beside her, made her seem older than her age. She didn't try to make friends, didn't laugh at jokes, didn't join in when others passed notes or talked about movies. And yet people noticed her more because of it. After class, when she walked through the hallway, she could hear the whispers again. Some weren't cruel, just curious. Others carried that sting that only middle schoolers can deliver. Soft enough to pretend innocence, sharp enough to hurt. Who brings a violin to school every day? Maybe she thinks she's some kind of prodigy. Amara didn't respond. She had learned early that words didn't always fix things. Music did. By lunch, she already had nicknames. And though she ate alone, she didn't look lonely. She opened her lunch quietly, kept her earbuds in, and hummed to herself. In her mind, she replayed the sound of her violin, the warm echo of strings, her grandmother's voice saying, "Play what you feel, not what they want." Her last class of the day was orchestra. Room 117. That was the one she had been waiting for. Maybe here among instruments and notes she'd find a place that felt safe. When she walked in, students were tuning violins, plucking strings, laughing loudly. The noise scratched at her nerves. Mr. Darnell was at the front, back turned, writing something on the whiteboard. He wore a gray blazer that didn't fit right, and spoke with that kind of forced confidence people use when they've lost something and are pretending they haven't. "Find a seat anywhere," he said without turning around. Amara sat in the last row. She placed her case gently on the floor next to her foot. She wanted to tell him she already knew how to play, that she'd been performing since she was 8, but he didn't ask. He didn't even look her way. She glanced around the room. Rows of students pretending to be interested, the sound of bows sliding, strings being tested. It smelled like old wood and polish. It was familiar, comforting. Mr. Darnell finally turned to face them, clapping his hands once. "All right, let's warm up." His voice carried authority, but not kindness. As he spoke, his eyes moved across the room, landing briefly on Amara. He held her gaze for a second too long, not with interest, but with something colder. That look made Amara's stomach tighten again. She knew that look. She'd seen it before, from people who judged first and asked questions never. When class ended, she packed her violin slowly, careful not to rush, letting the others leave first. Mr. Darnell stayed at the front, pretending to erase the board. He looked over his shoulder once more just as she lifted her case. Their eyes met, and he gave a small smirk. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smirk that says, "I'm going to see what you're really made of." Amara didn't flinch. She didn't say a word. She just nodded slightly and walked out. Outside, the sunlight hit her face, warm and bright. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling the tension she had been holding all day. Her first day at Southridge Middle School was over, but something told her this wasn't just another school year. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this place was going to test her in ways she'd never been tested before. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready for it. Because while everyone saw a quiet new girl with a violin, they had no idea she was holding a storm inside that could silence them all. The next 2 weeks at Southridge Middle felt like a slow storm brewing. Amara kept to herself, walking the same quiet halls every day with her backpack on one shoulder and her violin case in hand. She didn't talk much, but everyone knew her now. You couldn't miss her, the new girl with calm eyes and an old violin. At lunch, she sat under the tree behind the cafeteria, sketching tiny music notes in her notebook. Sometimes she'd hum softly, just enough for the wind to carry it away. But in the orchestra room, that quiet calm seemed to bother Mr. Darnell. He wasn't cruel on the surface, just sharp. The kind of teacher who thought sarcasm was humor and control was respect. He had favorites. The same 4 or 5 students who always got solos and special praise. Their parents donated to the school, came to every show, smiled the widest at parent-teacher night. Then there were the others, the ones who filled the back rows, the invisible ones. Amara was one of them, and she liked it that way. Until one Monday afternoon when everything changed. That day, the air in room 117 felt heavy. The blinds let in stripes of sunlight that cut across the floor. Students were restless. Mr. Darnell seemed tense, pacing a little more than usual. One of the cello players had forgotten his sheet music, and Darnell's patience was thin. He tossed a spare copy onto the stand and said with that tired, sharp smile, "Try not to waste everyone's time next round." The class laughed softly. Then his eyes swept across the room and landed on Amara. She was sitting in the back, quietly tightening her bow, pretending to be invisible. But Mr. Darnell stopped pacing. "You've been quiet," he said. "Too quiet." A few kids turned in their seats. The room went still. "You've been here almost a month," he continued, crossing his arms. "I think it's time we hear what you've got, Miss Jennings." Amara's heart thudded once hard. She hadn't prepared for this. Not today. Not in front of strangers who still whispered her name in the halls. But she stood anyway. Her grandmother had taught her one thing. When someone doubts you, let your music answer. She walked to the front, lifted her violin case onto a chair and opened it carefully. "Great," said Darnell, stepping aside with a mock flourish. "Let's hear some of that magic." The word magic came out bitter, like he didn't believe she had any. A few students snickered. Someone whispered, "She's gonna mess up." Amara didn't speak. She placed the violin beneath her chin and took one slow breath. The moment her bow touched the strings, everything changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was soft, almost fragile at first, but so alive it made people stop fidgeting in their seats. The melody floated through the air like it had weight, like it carried every story she'd never told. It was the piece her grandmother had taught her the night before she passed away. A slow, haunting tune from an old folk song that spoke of loss, hope, and starting again. By the second line, the whispers had vanished. By the third, even the fluorescent light seemed quieter. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence so deep it pressed against the walls. Amara lowered her bow, exhaled quietly, and stepped back. Mr. Darnell didn't move. His arms stayed folded, his jaw tight. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he cleared his throat. "All right," he said flatly. "Next section." And just like that, the spell broke. But something inside that room had changed. A line had been crossed that no one could uncross. Amara sat down again, calm, expression steady. But inside, her chest burned with a strange mix of pride and sadness. She hadn't meant to prove anything. She just wanted to play. After class, when the bell rang, students lingered longer than usual. Brianna, a girl from the front row, walked by and whispered, "That was crazy good." Amara smiled faintly. "Thanks." Behind her, she could hear a few others talking. "Did you see Darnell's face?" He didn't expect that at all. Mr. Darnell stayed at his desk, scribbling something on a paper that didn't need writing. When Amara passed by, he looked up just once, his eyes narrow, unreadable. That night, Amara replayed the moment over and over. Not the music, but his face. That small flicker of something between surprise and anger. She didn't understand it yet, but she could feel it. The performance had changed how he saw her. And not in a good way. The next day, the classroom felt colder. No one laughed. No one whispered when she entered. Mr. Darnell didn't greet anyone. He just tapped the board and said, "Warm up, page 12. Halfway through class, he suddenly clapped his hands once. "All right, we're doing something different today," he announced. "Solo rotations. No sheet music. Just play a few bars. Let's see what you've got. Groans filled the room. We'll start from the back, he added, eyes locking on Amara. Jennings, you first. The room froze. Amara looked up, instantly knowing this wasn't about music, this was about control. She rose slowly, took her violin again and began to play. This time her fingers didn't hesitate. The sound was stronger, faster, fiercer. A declaration, not a melody. When she finished, she looked up. Mr. Darnell's smile was tight. Impressive, he said. For someone who doesn't exactly look like the conservatory type. The class went dead silent. Amara didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, steady, unflinching. And in that silence, everyone realized this wasn't just about music anymore. It was about respect. And the man who tried to humiliate her had just made himself very, very small. The day after that solo, Southridge Middle School felt different. Not louder, not busier, just heavier. Like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. When Amara walked through the hallway, conversation softened. Heads turned. Some kids smiled, others just stared. She wasn't sure if it was admiration or curiosity, maybe both. She didn't crave the attention. If anything, it made her uneasy. She had come here to disappear, not to become the new rumor everyone wanted to pass around. Inside room 117, the orchestra class was unusually quiet. The clatter of tuning instruments was replaced by whispers that died as soon as she entered. Mr. Darnell stood near the whiteboard, pretending to write something important. He didn't even look at her. All right, he said, clapping his hands once. Warm up, let's go. His tone was sharper than usual, but no one argued. Bows rose, strings vibrated. Yet underneath that noise there was a strange tension, a quiet that hummed beneath the music. Amara followed along, keeping her focus on the sheet. Her playing was steady, precise, but she could feel it, the teacher's eyes flicking her way and then snapping back to the page. Halfway through the lesson, he stopped everyone. Okay, stop, that's enough. He sighed dramatically, pacing. Some of you, he said, looking right at her, seem to think this class is a stage. It's not. The words stung even though they were dressed as general advice. The class looked at her, not all, but enough to make her feel the heat rise in her chest. He continued, music isn't about showing off. It's about discipline, humility, and knowing your place in an ensemble. That last phrase, knowing your place, landed like a slap. Amara's bow froze midair. She didn't answer. She never did. But her silence said enough. When the bell rang, she was the first to leave. In the hallway, she heard the murmurs again, now more fragmented, more divided. He's mad because she's better than his favorites. He was out of line. Bro? Nah, she's getting special treatment. He's just keeping balance. Every hallway had its own version of the story, and every version twisted a little more. At lunch, she sat under the same tree as always. But now she wasn't alone. A girl from her class, Brianna, walked up and sat down without asking. You okay? She asked softly. Amara shrugged. I'm fine. Brianna fiddled with her straw. He was wrong for that. Everyone knows it. You didn't deserve it. Amara looked down at her lunch. It's fine, she said again, but it wasn't. She spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. She played when she was told. She smiled politely when someone complimented her. But she could feel the cracks forming, small, quiet shifts in how people acted. Even Mr. Darnell had changed. He didn't yell. He didn't even mock. He just ignored her. When he called for sections to play, he skipped her name. When the class performed as a group, he looked everywhere but her. And yet, that cold silence hurt more than any sarcasm could have. One afternoon after class, Amara stayed behind to pack up her violin. She thought everyone had left, but Mr. Darnell's voice broke the quiet. Jennings, he said without turning around. She froze. Yes, sir? He adjusted a stack of music sheets on his desk. You play well, he said. His tone was measured, too calm. But talent isn't everything. Respect matters too. Amara hesitated. I've never disrespected you. He turned now, his eyes hard. You embarrassed me. That's worse. The words hit like a punch. She didn't even know what to say. She wanted to tell him she didn't mean to, that all she did was play when asked. But something told her it wouldn't matter. Instead, she simply said, I only did what you told me to. He stared at her for a long second, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're a clever one, aren't you?" And with that, he left the room. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She replayed everything, his tone, the stares, the whispers. For the first time, she questioned whether playing had been a mistake. Maybe she should have stayed silent. Maybe it would have been easier. But then she thought of her grandmother, the woman's warm hands guiding hers on the strings, her soft voice saying, "Play like you're speaking to God." That memory steadied her. The next morning, Amara decided she wouldn't hide her music anymore. She still wouldn't talk back or fight. That wasn't her way. But she'd keep playing, and she'd let the music say everything she couldn't. By the end of the week, the whole school had picked sides. Some saw her as the quiet hero who stood up without a word. Others called her a troublemaker, a show-off who wanted attention, and Mr. Darnell? He carried on like nothing had happened, but every time his chalk touched the board, his hand trembled just slightly. Rumors about his comment had reached other teachers. The counselor, Miss Bright, stopped Amara in the hallway one morning. "I heard about what happened in class," she said gently. "You handled yourself well." Amara smiled faintly. "I just played." Ms. Bright nodded. "Sometimes that's the loudest thing you can do." As the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Students who'd ignored her before started sitting closer during practice. A boy from percussion asked if she could help him tune. Even Brianna started walking with her after school. Amara didn't talk about the incident anymore, but she could feel its echo in the way people looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet respect. She had become a symbol without meaning to. Not because she fought back, but because she didn't have to. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. Because the same music that had silenced a classroom was about to shake the entire school. By the next week, Amara had learned to walk through the halls without flinching. The whispers were still there, but softer now, like wind passing through lockers instead of knives thrown from the shadows. She had grown used to the glances, some curious, some proud, some judgmental. That's how it worked here. You didn't need to speak to become a story, but something else had shifted too. Her silence. The same thing that once made her invisible now carried a strange kind of power. People listened when she played. They noticed when she entered a room. And Mr. Darnell? He noticed too, even when he tried not to. He no longer spoke to her directly. He called roll, skipped her name, moved on. It was as if he was trying to erase her by pretending she didn't exist. But Amara didn't need his permission to breathe. That Friday, during lunch, she sat in the courtyard sketching in her notebook. She wasn't drawing music notes this time, just a small picture of her violin. Its wooden body, the bow that once belonged to her grandmother, the tiny carvings near the neck. Every line she drew steadied her hands, reminded her of home. Amara, she looked up. Standing in front of her was Ms. Diana Bright, the school counselor. A kind woman with calm eyes, the type that didn't rush when she spoke. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. Amara nodded, closing her notebook. The counselor's office smelled faintly of cinnamon tea and printer paper. There were soft chairs, not the cold plastic kind in classrooms. A poster on the wall read, "You matter even on quiet days." Ms. Bright gestured for her to sit. "I've been hearing a lot about you," she said gently. Amara stiffened a little. "From who?" "From everyone," Ms. Bright smiled. "Teachers, students, even the principal. Seems like you made quite an impression." Amara looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Ms. Bright replied. "You just played." Amara nodded. The silence between them was soft, not heavy like the one in class. It felt safe. After a moment, the counselor leaned forward. "Tell me something," she said. "When you play, what do you feel?" Amara thought about it. No one had ever asked her that before. "I feel like I'm not small," she said finally. "Like I belong somewhere. Like someone's listening." Ms. Bright smiled. "That's a gift, you know. Not many people can turn silence into something beautiful." She opened a drawer and pulled out a small folded flyer. "I think you should see this," she said, sliding it across the desk. It was for the Bakersfield Youth Ensemble, a weekend program downtown for young musicians. Open auditions. No fees, no uniforms, just music. They don't care where you come from, Ms. Bright said softly. Only how you play. Amara stared at the flyer. Something about it made her chest tighten when in a good way. It was a door and she hadn't seen one in a long time, but, she started. What if Mr. Darnell finds out? Ms. Bright tilted her head. Then he finds out. You're not breaking a rule. You're following a passion. Amara folded the flyer gently and tucked it into her backpack. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no either. That afternoon, word about her spread again, this time faster, louder. Someone had filmed her first solo on their phone. The short clip made its way through the school like wildfire. You could hear the laughter at the beginning. And the silence at the end. It wasn't viral, but it was enough to reach people she didn't even know. By Monday, students from other classes whispered as she passed, "That's her. She's the one who made Darnell shut up." It wasn't hate this time, it was awe. But to Amara, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like pressure. In orchestra, Mr. Darnell's mood was unreadable. He acted as though nothing had changed. He didn't mention the video, didn't look at her, but every note that filled the air seemed to echo between them, sharp and personal. He was losing control of the story, and everyone could feel it. That week, Amara practiced harder than ever. She stayed up late, repeating scales until her fingers ached. Her mother would peek through the doorway half asleep. "You'll wear those strings out," she'd say with a sleepy smile. Amara would just whisper, "Almost done." By Friday, she had made her choice. She would audition for the youth ensemble. When she told Ms. Bright the next morning, the woman smiled like she already knew. "I'll drive you there," she said. "If your mom's okay with it." Amara's mother agreed instantly. "If it makes her happy," she said. The following Saturday, Amara stood outside the old Civic Center, her violin case in hand. The building was faded but beautiful. Wide steps, tall windows, sunlight spilling through the cracks. Inside, the air buzzed with sound. Violins tuning, piano keys testing scales, the hum of nervous energy. Her heart raced. She wasn't scared. Just full of every memory, every word she'd swallowed, every note she hadn't yet played. When her name was called, she walked to the stage. The panel of judges barely looked up. That was fine. She didn't need them to see her. She needed them to hear her. She lifted her violin, took a breath, and began to play. The room softened instantly. The sound was pure and alive, weaving between the walls. Each note told a story she couldn't put into words. Of her grandmother, her mother, her loneliness, her courage. And for the first time in weeks, Amara didn't think of Mr. Darnell or the whispers or the school. She just played. When she finished, there was a pause. Then one of the judges looked up and said quietly, "You have something rare." Amara smiled, not out of pride, but relief. As she walked out of the hall, Ms. Bright was waiting in the lobby, eyes shining. "How'd it go?" she asked. Amara grinned for the first time in a long time. "I remembered why I started playing." Ms. Bright nodded. "Then you've already won." That night, Amara sat by her window, violin resting across her knees. The city hummed softly below. For the first time since she'd arrived in Bakersfield, she didn't feel like the new girl. She felt like herself. And though she didn't know what would come next, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let anyone decide her worth again. By the time Amara returned from her youth ensemble audition, something inside her had shifted. She walked the halls of South Ridge a little straighter. Not with pride, just peace. She didn't need people to notice her anymore. Her music had already done that for her. But schools are like small towns. News never fades, it just changes shape. The story of the new girl who silenced the class had turned into 100 little versions. Each one stretched, twisted, retold. Some said she embarrassed the teacher on purpose. Others said she was recruited by some fancy music group. Amara ignored it all. She came to class, tuned her violin, played when told, and left quietly. Mr. Darnell, however, was no longer the same. The edge in his voice was gone. The sarcasm had thinned out. He didn't look at her, didn't call her name. He treated her like empty air, and yet everyone knew it wasn't peace. It was avoidance. Even the other students could feel it. A cold wall between them. The laughter in the orchestra room was quieter now. The ones who used to giggle at his dry jokes looked uncertain. Some had started looking at Amara with quiet guilt, like they were realizing they had laughed at the wrong moments. Then one Monday morning, an announcement came over the intercom. The principal, Ms. Lindley, spoke in her calm, clipped tone. "Students and faculty, This Friday after school, we'll be holding an open forum in the library to discuss respect and equity in our classrooms. All are welcome. Participation is voluntary. The message was short, but everyone knew what it was about. You could see it in the glances exchanged across desks, the whispers during lunch. Some kids called it the Darnell meeting. Amara felt her stomach sink when she heard. She didn't want more attention. She didn't want to be the center of something again. All she ever wanted was to play her music and disappear into it. Friday came faster than she expected. The library was packed. Teachers, students, even a few parents. Chairs filled every corner. A small panel sat in the front. Ms. Lindley, Ms. Bright, and 2 student leaders. Amara slipped in quietly, sitting in the back near the window. She told herself she'd just listen, not speak. She didn't want drama. She'd already lived enough of it. The meeting started gently. Ms. Lindley welcomed everyone, her voice calm and careful. "We're here to listen," she said. "No blame, just honesty." Then she opened the floor. At first, no one moved. Then a tall boy named Mateo from another class raised his hand. "I think sometimes," he said slowly, "teachers confuse silence with respect. But sometimes we're quiet because we don't feel safe saying anything." The room murmured softly. Next, Brianna, Amara's classmate, stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "We all saw what happened in orchestra," she said. "We all heard what was said, and most of us just stayed quiet. That's on us too." Heads turned toward her. Amara felt her heart thud. She wanted to disappear into her chair. Brianna went on. She didn't try to embarrass anyone. She was just doing what he asked. And the way he treated her after that, it wasn't right. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Teachers exchanged glances. Some looked down. Then from somewhere in the middle row, someone said, "Can the student this is about say something?" The room turned. A ripple moved through the crowd as eyes landed on her. Amara froze. Her hands gripped her violin case on her lap. Ms. Bright gave her a small nod, gentle, encouraging. After a moment, Amara stood. She didn't walk to the front. She didn't grab the mic. She just spoke from where she was standing, voice steady and soft. "I didn't want to be a lesson," she said. "I came here to learn just like everybody else." Her words hung in the air. You could have heard the hum of the ceiling lights. "I didn't ask to be called out," she continued. "I didn't ask to be tested. I was just doing what I was told. I played when I was asked to." She paused, glancing down at her hands. And when someone tells you that your voice or your talent doesn't belong in a space, it stays with you. Even if you try to ignore it, the room was still. Even the adults looked unsure of what to say. Finally, a parent spoke up. "Are you saying the teacher was racist?" Amara looked up, calm but firm. "I'm saying he made a choice. And he made it in front of everyone. What you call it depends on what you saw, that was all." She sat back down, heart pounding. But her face, still Ms. Bright looked at her like she was seeing more than just a student. Like she was seeing courage wearing quiet clothes. After that, voices filled the room again. Students shared stories, moments from other classes, other times they'd felt unseen or dismissed. Teachers listened, some nodding, some blinking like they'd never realized how much harm a single comment could cause. By the end, the meeting didn't feel like an attack anymore. It felt like release, like a breath everyone had been holding too long. When the forum ended, students walked up to Amara one by one. Some said thank you. Some just nodded. One girl whispered, "You said what I never could." By the time Amara left the library, the sun had already gone down. The air outside was cool and quiet. As she opened her locker to grab her books, she saw something inside that hadn't been there before. A folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It wasn't signed. No handwriting, just typed words on white paper. "You reminded us what truth sounds like when played without fear." Amara stared at the note for a long time, then tucked it back inside her locker. For once, she didn't need to wonder who it was from. It didn't matter. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, violin in her lap, city lights blinking outside her window. She played softly. Not for the school, not for the counselor, not for anyone watching. Just for herself. And as the notes filled her small apartment, she finally understood something her grandmother used to say. "Sometimes, baby, the world won't listen until you stop trying to be quiet." In the days that followed, the atmosphere at South Ridge began to change. Teachers were suddenly more careful with their words. Students started speaking up more. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew it all started with that moment when the quiet girl with the violin spoke her truth without raising her voice. Amara had no idea that this was only the beginning, because the world outside those walls was about to hear her. The Monday after the forum felt strangely quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet, not like before. This was something else. The school felt lighter, like the walls had finally exhaled. When Amara walked into South Ridge, she noticed it first in the eyes of the other students. They didn't avoid her anymore. Some smiled softly. Some nodded as if saying, "We heard you." Even teachers seemed gentler, more aware, like they were seeing their classrooms through new glass. But the one person who hadn't changed was Mr. Darnell. He was back from a personal break, his blazer a little more wrinkled, his voice more distant. He didn't speak to her, didn't look at her, didn't call her name during roll. He taught like a man reading from a script he didn't believe in anymore. The sting was gone from his sarcasm, replaced by something emptier. And though Amara had imagined this moment for weeks now that it had come, she didn't feel victory. She just felt done. She had no anger left, only clarity. That afternoon, during practice, Ms. Bright stopped her near the lockers. "Got a minute?" she asked. Amara nodded. The counselor's smile was soft, but her eyes were glowing with something like pride. "I wanted you to meet someone." She led Amara down the hall to the small music office near the auditorium. Inside, a woman stood beside a piano, tall, graceful, her silver hair tied in a loose bun. She looked like someone who'd lived her life surrounded by music. "Amara, this is Miss Thelma Rowe," said Ms. Bright. "She's the director of the Bakersfield Youth Ensemble." Amara froze. "The one from the flyer?" "The one from the flyer," Ms. Bright said, smiling. Ms. Rowe stepped forward, extending her hand. "I heard about you," she said warmly. "You played at the auditions, didn't you?" Amara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I was one of the judges," Ms. Rowe said, her tone gentle but sure. "You have something rare, precision and emotion. That's not common at your age." Amara didn't know what to say. Compliments made her nervous. Ms. Rowe smiled at her silence. "We have a spring showcase coming up in a few weeks. I'd like you to perform." Amara blinked. "Me, solo?" Ms. Rowe nodded. "You'd be the youngest soloist we've had in years. Think you can handle that?" For a long moment, Amara didn't answer. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Finally, she said, "Yes." That night, she could barely sleep. The thought of standing on a real stage, lights in her eyes, a full audience, it scared her. But underneath that fear was something stronger. Longing. This was what she had dreamed of since she was little, to make people feel something real through her music. Every day after school, she practiced. Her mother would come home tired from work, to the sound of violin notes floating through their small apartment. Sometimes slow, sometimes sharp, sometimes so beautiful it almost hurt. "You're gonna wear those strings thin," her mother would joke. Amara would smile. "I'll buy new ones when I make it big." Her mom laughed softly. "You already made it big, baby. You just don't see it yet." Meanwhile, word of her forum speech had spread beyond South Ridge. A local arts blogger wrote a short piece about the brave young musician who spoke through silence. Then a small newspaper picked it up. Then another. By the week of the showcase, people outside her school were talking about her. Teachers from other districts, parents, even local musicians. But Amara didn't care about the noise. She cared about the stage. She chose her piece carefully, something bold, powerful, and honest. Not sweet, not safe. Something that could tell her story without words. On the day of the performance, the Bakersfield Civic Center buzzed with soft chatter. Families filed in, carrying flowers, clapping politely for each young musician. The air smelled faintly of dust and perfume. The stage lights glowed warm against the curtains. Backstage, Amara sat on a metal chair, violin resting across her lap. Her palms were sweating. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Ms. Rowe appeared beside her. "You ready?" Amara nodded slowly. "You don't have to prove anything," Ms. Rowe said softly. "Not to them, not to me. Just play." Amara smiled faintly. "That's the plan." When her name was announced, the applause was quiet, polite curiosity more than excitement. She walked out slowly, her shoes echoing against the wooden stage. The light hit her face, bright and blinding, but she didn't flinch. She bowed slightly, lifted her violin, and began to play. The first note was gentle, almost too soft. But then came the next and the next, weaving together like silk threads. Her bow glided effortlessly, the sound rising and falling like breath. She didn't just play a melody. She spoke through every note, not about being new, about being doubted, about standing in a room full of laughter and finding courage anyway. The room went silent. Even the children in the back stopped whispering. Each movement of her bow carried years of quiet hurt, turned into beauty. She could feel her grandmother in every note, her mother in every beat, Ms. Bright's faith in every pause. And for the first time, Amara wasn't playing to survive. She was playing to live. When the last note faded, there was a moment of stillness, the kind that feels sacred, too fragile to break. Then suddenly the audience erupted. Applause filled the hall. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears. Ms. Bright was on her feet, clapping so hard her hands trembled. And somewhere near the middle of the crowd, Amara caught sight of Mr. Darnell. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smirking either. He just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on her like he was finally seeing her for the first time. After the show backstage, Amara sat on a folding chair, her bow still in her hand. Her fingers were shaking, not from fear, from release. She had carried so much inside her, and tonight she let it all go. Ms. Rowe walked in and knelt beside her. "That," she said softly, "wasn't just playing. That was truth." Amara smiled weakly. It felt like breathing. "Then keep breathing, my dear," Ms. Rowe said. "The world needs more of that." The next morning, a small article appeared online. Local teen stuns Bakersfield audience with powerful violin solo. It called her a prodigy with poise beyond her years. At school, there was no announcement, no parade, just quiet stares and gentle smiles. Mr. Darnell avoided her still, but the spark in his voice was gone forever. He wasn't cruel anymore, just silent. And maybe, Amara thought, that was enough because she had learned something greater. You don't win by shouting louder. You win by playing louder than their doubt. That night on her balcony, she sat with her violin across her knees. The city lights shimmered below like tiny stars. Her mom joined her, leaning against the railing. "You didn't let it change you," her mother said softly. Amara looked out over the quiet street. "No," she said, "but it changed how I see things." Her mom smiled. "Your grandma would have cried her eyes out." Amara laughed, soft and real. "She always did when I played." And as the night breeze carried the echo of her music into the distance, Amara knew her story wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Of a girl who turned silence into a symphony, and pain into something that made the whole world listen. The days after the performance passed like soft music fading into silence. There were no fireworks, no crowds at her door, just whispers that carried through hallways like the afterglow of something beautiful. At South Ridge, Amara became a name people spoke with quiet respect. Some said she was lucky, others said she was brave. But Amara didn't see herself as either. She still walked to school with her violin case strapped over her shoulder, her hair tied back, earbuds in, the same way she always had. The only difference was the air around her, lighter now, like the world had finally stopped pressing against her. One morning, as she stepped into the orchestra room, she noticed something strange. The seats in the back, the ones where students used to slouch and whisper, were now full of kids sitting straighter, tuning their instruments more carefully. Even the ones who never cared much before now seemed present. Mr. Darnell was already at the front, his usual gray blazer hanging loosely on his frame. He didn't look at her when she walked in, but for the first time in weeks his voice didn't sound sharp. "Morning, class," he said quietly. No sarcasm, no performance, just words. Amara took her seat at the back. He began the lesson, his hands moving slower, more deliberate. When he finally looked her way, just for a moment, his expression wasn't cold. It was something else. Maybe regret, maybe realization. And that was enough. For the first time, Amara didn't feel small sitting in his class. She didn't feel invisible or unwanted. She just felt free. After school, she went to the counselor's office to thank Ms. Bright. The woman was sorting papers when Amara walked in, but her face lit up instantly. "Amara, I was hoping you'd stop by," she said, motioning to a chair. She placed a thin envelope on the desk. "This came for you." Amara opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the Bakersfield Youth Ensemble. "Congratulations," it began. "You have been selected to join our summer mentorship program for young musicians." Amara's hand shook slightly. She looked up, eyes wide. "Ms. Rowe recommended you personally," Ms. Bright said, smiling. "You impressed more than just the judges, Amara. You moved them." Amara felt her throat tighten. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ms. Bright said simply. "Say yes and keep going." Amara smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you." The next few weeks were calm, almost peaceful. No more rumors. No more tension. Just school, music, and the feeling that maybe for the first time she belonged. She still saw Mr. Darnell every day. He didn't apologize, and not in words, but his actions changed. He started giving every student a chance to play. He stopped playing favorites. Sometimes, during class, Amara caught him watching her, not with challenge but quiet reflection. And that was enough for her. By late spring, the sun had turned Bakersfield gold again. The cicadas hummed, the sidewalks shimmered with heat, and the school year began to wind down. Amara had one last event before summer, a community panel on representation in the arts, where young performers were invited to speak. She didn't want to at first. She wasn't a speaker. She was a musician. But Ms. Bright convinced her gently, saying, "Sometimes the right note isn't played. It's spoken," so she went. The event was small, a dozen students, a few teachers, some parents. Amara sat quietly at the table until it was her turn. When she stood, she didn't read from the paper she'd prepared. She just spoke. "When I started at South Ridge," she said, "I thought staying quiet would keep me safe. But silence doesn't protect you, it just hides you." She looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one. "Sometimes when people underestimate you, the best way to answer is not by shouting, but by showing them what they refuse to see." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I used to think my music was something private, something I had to protect from the world. But now I understand. It's my way of speaking. It's how I tell people who I am." When she finished, there was soft applause. But more than that, there was understanding. Afterward, a young girl, maybe 12, came up to her, clutching her mother's hand. She had deep brown eyes and held a small, scratched-up violin case. "You look like me," the girl said shyly. "I didn't think people like us could play like that." Amara knelt down so they were eye level. "You don't need permission," she said softly. "You just need patience. And a little fire." The girl grinned, and her mother's eyes shimmered with pride. That night, Amara thought about that moment more than any standing ovation she'd ever had. Maybe that was what her grandmother had meant when she said music could move hearts. A few days later, Ms. Rowe called. "We're finalizing the list for the mentorship program," she said. "And I want you to know, you'll be performing at the closing night concert." Amara's breath caught. "Me, alone?" "Not alone," Ms. Rowe said kindly. "With the kind of silence that listens." Amara laughed softly, understanding exactly what she meant. The summer concert came faster than she expected. The stage was bigger this time, real lights, cameras, an audience filled with families, musicians, and strangers who'd come just to hear. When she stepped out under the lights, she didn't feel small or scared anymore. She felt ready. Her fingers found the strings like old friends. And when she played, she didn't just play notes, she played memory. Every bowstroke carried a piece of her story. The laughter she ignored, the fear she faced, the silence she turned into strength. It was all there, alive, glowing, unstoppable. When she finished, the applause rose like thunder. But what mattered most wasn't the clapping. It was the faces in the crowd, strangers who looked changed, moved, awakened, and somewhere deep in her heart, Amara knew she had done what she came to do. That night, after the concert, she sat on the balcony with her mother again. The city lights shimmered below them, soft and warm. Her violin rested beside her, silent but still alive in the air. "You didn't let it change you," her mother said quietly. Amara smiled faintly. "It changed the way I see things," she said. "But I'm still me." Her mother nodded slowly. "Your grandma would have cried her eyes out." Amara laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded like music. "I think she did," she whispered. "Somewhere." As the night stretched around them, The city humming below, Amara closed her eyes. The wind moved gently through her hair, carrying the faint memory of strings and applause, and for the first time in her life she felt completely seen. Not because of how well she played, not because of who doubted her, but because she had found her voice, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. She had learned that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a girl standing tall with a violin in her hands, turning every ounce of pain into a note that refuses to fade. If someone tries to put you in a box, remember, you're not made of cardboard. You're made of sound, of stories, of everything they never tried to understand. Let your voice be the thing they hear long after they stop listening. And somewhere out there, under the soft lights of Bakersfield, a quiet girl with a violin kept playing, not for revenge, not for praise, but for the truth that lives in every note she ever learned to play without fear.